Today I'd like to show you how to build up a card. This is sort of a shabby chic look, but I want to show you how to build up lots of layers without getting what I call the pizza effect. So the pizza effect is really when you start adding lots of layers because you love this paper and you love this paper and then you really like those flowers and then maybe you love this border as well. But actually what's happening is it's all blending into one and you're not getting that dimension that you're hoping for, and it's really hard to see the layers between each other. So the way we do this is we look carefully at the colors we're using, we look at the textures, we give it some depth by adding things like foam pads as well. So I'm going to build this card up and I'm going to talk you through the techniques I'm using for each and every layer and why I'm choosing the materials or the colors and such that I am as I work. So the first thing I want to do is take parts of this collection. So I'm going with the Kaisercraft, and this is the Lady Light collection. It's absolutely stunning. Now, when you're working with a full collection, already you know that the elements are going to all match. So the papers and the die cut embellishments and such, they're all going to match beautifully. There's blues, there's greens, there's greys, there's pinks in here. You don't have to use everything, but you know that they're all on the same sort of shades and tones. So if you do decide to go with all the colours, they'll work beautifully. The only exception with these is the wood. Now the wood is gorgeous, very, very pretty, and I love that it's a bare wood, so you can colour it, you can ink it, you can paint it if you want to, you could heat emboss it as well. This means we can change the colour. Now, so this doesn't stand out against everything else and look very different. What I'm going to do is put some white over this. Now, the way I'm going to do that, first of all, because this needs to dry, I'll do this as my first step. I'm going to use structure paste. So I'm using from Cosmic Shimmer, the Andy Skinner structure paste. And all I'm going to do is, you can see there, it's an off-white, it's a grey, which works really well with these papers that I'm using here. And I'm just going to paint this over the top. I'm more dabbing than painting. So I'll get lots of texture. And I think the idea with building lots of layers is adding texture to them so that they stand out. Flat layers can very easily blend into each other because you don't have any shadows, you don't have any distinguishing features from one layer to another. So when you've got elements like this and you can add dimensional texture, then absolutely do so. So I'm just dabbing around here with the texture paste. Now you can heat set this if you want to. It's always best to leave something to dry so you don't get bubbles and such. But I'll pop that to the side and we can come back to that in a little while, and that should hopefully by then be dry by itself. So now I'm going to start building up my card, and I've already cut out this wood grain layer. This comes from the 6x6 paper pad. It's so pretty. You get multiple different backing papers in here and you get more than one sheet of each. So we've got newsprint here, we've got beautiful borders, we can cut them into strips. We've got elements like this. So I love these papers, and I love that you've got all the different colours, but you can have some that are all blue or you can have some that are a mixture of the different colours. So I've just taken, like I say, the wood grain paper, trimmed that down. This has a slight blue tone to it. Now I'm going to place that there for now, but I'm going to do something to it in a moment. I want another layer, so this is my background, and then I want a panel on top, and the panel, as I showed you earlier, this is this one. So this one is like a newsprint, there's lots of pattern in there. Similar sort of colours and tones to this one though, so when we do lay one on top of the other, we almost lose it. You don't see it much at all there, and if you were to glue this on even with foam pads to a point, you would kind of lose that. Now if you want the subtle look, that's fine, that's not a problem, you can do that, but I want to make this stand out. I want to see the layers and distinguish between them. So I'm going to take a black. Now this is again from the paper pad. It's more of a dark grey, and I've cut it to size so it's slightly larger. So now look what happens when I pop that on. That really pops. So I'll add a photo of this card at the end of the video so you can really see out in the daylight how the colours are picked out. Now I've cut this down, but I think that's a little bit too much of a border, so that's a little bit harsh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this and trim it so it's a slightly slimmer border there. I don't want to confuse it with the grains here, so they need to be a little bit different to that. So I'm going to just take a pencil I'm going to mark this, and sometimes if you've got a dark background to your paper but you're marking mats and layers, sometimes it's better to flip it over and mark it on the reverse side, and then you don't have to worry about not being able to find those lines once you pop it into your trimmer. So I'm just going to mark this, cut that border down a little bit more so it fits perfectly and it's a little more subtle, not quite as chunky. There, so that fits better. I've got a little bit of a border all the way around there. Now that doesn't have to be perfect, of course. We're going to put lots of other layers on there as well, but that's bringing that first layer up. Now what I'm also going to do before I glue any of this down is I've taken a border. This has come from the paper pack, and in the back we've got some die cut pieces. So as you can see there, that has come from this. So I've just popped that out. The blue then ties in with the blues of the backing paper, and I may need to trim it down slightly because I'm going to tuck it just under this edge to soften that edge there. Now again, the blue is lovely against the white, but that's kind of blending in. You're not seeing that jump up that you can see here. So rather than try and cut a border around this shape, I'm going to use black ink. So I'm going to bring in my black ink pad. So this is going to be a distress ink, so I can blend really nicely. I've got a foam applicator, and I'm just going to catch the very edge of this layer with the black. Now I'm going with black and grey because I've got these colours in my papers. It may be that you choose different papers and maybe a brown or a navy blue or a burgundy red is better for you as your contrasting colour, but it needs to be quite a dark colour. I'm just catching the very tips there because I think these edges will show. There we go. So very lightly, just gone round the edge. Now have a look. When we bring our card back again, look at the difference this is going to make. So straighten everything up. There. So the difference that has made, that's really brought that out. So I'm going to do the same around this bottom layer, just adding the black ink. There. Now we can really see the difference. The edges look finished. You can see the definite end to the paper and where the card base begins. So what I'm going to do now before I go any further is use some foam tape. I've got these from Craft Stash. They're a really basic white foam tape, really easy to peel and a good thickness as well. It's a good idea if you're using different widths of foam tape, just make sure that the thicknesses of them are the same, otherwise your card will be a little bit wavy where you've used different thicknesses across. So I'm going to be using the same thickness, which is around about, looks like about 3 or 4 millimeters, so it's quite a good thickness and different widths. So the large panel will be a thicker foam tape. I'm putting these on. Just plan out your card first of all, so before you stick anything down, rearrange everything as many times as you need to make sure you're happy with it. Start sticking your base layers on and then go back and have another arrangement and make sure you're still happy with everything there, and keep doing this process. This will make sure that you don't stick anything down before you're ready, and the last thing you want to be doing is lifting up pieces that are glued down. Now the reason I just turned that round is this is a preference for me, but I find that I like any dark colours. If I've got a random pattern like this, if there's a darker area, I like it to be to the bottom. So this bit to me is darker than this end, so I've turned it around so this will be towards the bottom. Otherwise to me it just feels a bit top heavy. So sticking those down. Now if you want to, you can do this last if you prefer, if you want to see how your card's panning out. You can curl the edges as well. So just give them a curl, and that will help towards this shabby chic look, but also help to distinguish those layers and really show the layers off. Now I'm going to do the same. I'm going to glue or foam tape down my black layer, or the grey, dark grey. This one's got a bit of a sheen to it as well, which is really nice for picking up, although we are going to be covering a lot of this up. Now with this layer, I could go around with the black ink, to make it pop, but because it's going onto this dark grey layer here, I don't need to do that. Now I'm going to add a little bit more to the shabby chic look here, and I'm going to tear into it. I love this effect. I think it's really, really easy to do. I'm going to do it around this area. Now we're going to be working in threes as such, or thirds, and using the triangle system. That's for balancing the embellishments on your card out. So I'm going to have a cluster here. Now the reason the cluster is going to be here and not, say, central, is if you split your card into threes, so threes this way, threes this way, what you want to do is aim to have your main embellishments on some of those lines. So this section here, so you can imagine where the edge of this panel is, that's 1/3 from this edge, 2/3 from this edge. So I'm going to place my main embellishment section here, and then up here on this third line that runs across here, I'm going to place a little bit more, and that will draw your eye across the across the card. Now I talked about a triangle as well, so ideally to ensure your card is balanced, you need to have a triangle of focus. So we'll have one focus point here, a smaller one up here, and then we'll need another smaller one somewhere else, and that will be around here, and this will be our triangle around our card to draw the eye around. So I'm going to have my little tear just in here. So I'm just going to take my card and I'm simply going to put a little tear. Now if you do a small one to start with and then see how you go. Now I'm not going to ink this. Usually I'd say, right, ink the edges of the tear and that will really bring it to life, but the white here is going to really stand out against the black background. So I've just rolled back the corners, and it doesn't have to be very big, it can be just a little bit. As you can see, that stands out. Okay, so now I've done that, I can now put my foam tape on the back and put this layer on as well. And just a tip when you're putting your foam tape on as well, don't put it right to the edge, because you may want to be tucking elements underneath later on, even if you've not chosen to right now. So if you're putting large panels down, as I did here, I've got enough area to squeeze the ends of some embellishments under there, keeping it all neat and tidy. These are my favourite types of cards to make, because I love that you don't need your angles and your lines to be perfectly straight or too balanced, because the shabby chic and the layered look really does allow for lots of almost mistakes, if you want, and playing around with different effects. So now what I need to do is start building up some of these layers I was talking about. It's not quite dry, but it's not far off. But my texture paste frame is going to sit around about here. Now I could have that seeing through to that side, which is pretty, but I think that I want to lift that up. I want to make this stand out more, and there's a die cut element in this set with a darker background, and this works really well actually, because then that could be the sentiment for my card, and that fits beautifully behind there. So I'm going to add a little bit of wet glue, and I've got the Craft Stash wet glue here, and I'm just going to add small dots around the edge. So this is another element that needs to be popped aside to dry for just a few moments before we can put it onto our card. There, so just placing that behind, not being too perfect with it, because you're going to have other elements laying over the top. There, so just be careful, that's not quite dry, I've got a little bit on my fingers there, but I can put that to the side now and pop that there and leave that to dry while we work everything else out. But I know that this is going to be sitting here, this is going to be one of my top layers. Underneath that, I want to have a selection of these die cuts, but I've got to bear in mind my triangle all the time. So whatever I have here, I'm going to sort of bring across a small amount, just a fraction of that colour, of that pattern maybe, up to here. So the first example of that is going to be, I'm going to have a luggage tag. Now again, one of the die cuts from the set here, and this is a really beautiful tag. In fact, I'm actually going to put a little bit of twine and this is a blue and white twine that I just had in my stash. I'm going to thread that through, and just to add to the texture. I think if you can add any sort of fabrics in here, wood is of course a great one which we're adding anyway. Things like that, it's going to help you with those layers without it all being paper. So cutting this off, and to add to the look with the twine, I'm just going to untwist the edges to give it a frayed look. Okay, now again I'm going to come in with my foam and just blacken those edges slightly. Okay, not too much, I'm not catching the twine, just a little bit, so that we can really pick out those edges against there. So I'm going to put this here somewhere to echo that, so it's the colour that I'm looking at echoing. I'm going to bring in this tape measure here, so you can see the colours are very similar. Now I'm going to be placing that along this edge, but this is a little bit big. I just want a small cluster here. So what I'm going to do is tear the edges. I'm not looking at how big. Now if you tear so that you are lifting up the paper off the edge that you want to keep as such, you'll get the white edge. Now with this I don't need to do any darkening of the edges because I've got the white that will stand out there from the torn edges, and along the measurement line I've already got a dark line, and that is going to tuck under there. Now I'm not going to, if I press that as far as it will go, it's hitting the foam there, but it's directly in line with this edge, and that's too neat, so I'll just bring that out ever so slightly so it just falls beyond. That adds a little bit of interest. Okay, you don't want your lines to line up too much. Okay, so I'm going to use wet glue for this to glue that down. So pop that on, so then I've still got room to tuck under. So again, I'm not lining it up to the top, I've brought it down a little bit so it's sort of sitting on that third line, okay, across there. Now also on here I'm going to put a clock face, but this is almost going to be hidden by here, so it's just a little bit of interest there. Again, I'm going to bring in my black ink all the way round, not being too neat. Make sure I've got that the right way round, so about there. I'm not gluing any of these yet. So I'm also going to bring in some leaves. Now this is where I need to have this as an example. So I'm going to have some flowers overlapping or coming out from under elements. I love the green and the pink. Now this flower is a little bit big for me, so really I want to look at the flowers that I've got, which are these elements. The smallest element, which is this with the pink and green, is going to be what's going to be echoed at the top here. Now if you press that in and it's not going in as far as you'd like it, you can always snip it down so it comes a little bit further there, like so. That's perfect. And then the other elements can be positioned. Now these can be positioned all underneath the frame, or you can start tucking them from underneath the other layers, but I want to keep, so they're just hints of leaves and flowers coming out, and vary where they come from as well. Some come from under this panel, this big panel here, some come from under the frame, so you're giving that look of dimension again, and that one under there. So already our eye is being drawn from the frame to here across the triangle there, so across the whole of the card. Now I've got the blue of the twine in here, and I've got blues in the backing papers, so lastly I'm going to bring a little more blue in. I've just edged this slightly, and I'm going to tuck this under here at an angle, so the wording ties in beautifully. It says friends for a lifetime, so that works really well with all we need is each other. So I've just cut that at an angle, tuck that behind there. This will all be glued down soon. And then to finish this off for almost another layer, I've got a die cut panel and I've shaped it slightly, and this can sit wherever you feel. I like it there because I think this rose is lifted up, giving it some depth there, so I want to echo that here. So if that's the case, I'm going to bring this pink flower downwards a bit. I'm going to change the shape of this ever so slightly so it can come down a bit further so we can see that pink. There, so I'm going to glue all of that down and then I'll hold it up for you and show you all those different layers. A little tip here while you are gluing is as you're taking your layers back off, if there's anything you can glue down to help remind you where things go, do that as you work down. So these leaves I can actually glue to the clock face here. So a little bit of glue just on there and then I'll know that that goes there. So then I'll lift my clock face up and I can glue down my tag on top of my leaves here and here, so that's all in place. I haven't got to move anything. So I'm just really going to put a finger on here and I'm going to work my glue underneath, making sure that everything is sealed in and secure. And then I know that I haven't got to think about repositioning everything again. Now I just added glue here to the ends of everything so that I can do that rolling, really bend and roll the paper so that I can lift it up and give it more dimension and shape if I want to. So I've got that option. If you glue it all down completely flat, you don't have that choice. By using a wet glue for these elements, I've still got the option of moving things around just a little bit while it's still all drying. But once I'm happy with the placement, I'll stop and leave everything there to dry. So there's my finished card with all my layers glued down. I almost forgot to put the blue panel in there, but I just snuck it in afterwards. And I think you'll agree that it doesn't look like it's not the pizza effect. So all the layers haven't been thrown together randomly. We've purposely placed them. You can see lots of dimension through them. And it's not too much for the eye. So the eye is immediately drawn to this focal point, which is what we wanted. But then you come across here because you see an elements from this up here. And then, of course, you'll come across to the interest of the tear. And that's what you want from a card, is your eye being drawn around it and looking without being overwhelmed by there being too much going on. So I think you'll agree that for a shabby chic card with lots of layers, it's still got the structure and purpose that you want from any card you're making.